It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Hello, every nerds. Ah! Happy Friday Eve. Let's see. Light group today, but that's okay. Thursdays are usually a little bit on the light side. Thank you so much, Druid. My dear Druid is always here. So, I hope you guys have had a good week. As always, it flies by. You know, I had that experience this morning, which, if you're a reader, you probably also have, which is there is not enough time in any day, week, month, or year where I can read all the stuff I want to read. I was doing some quick research today for our topic. Almost, unless it's Big Biz. I'm trying to research our topic, and I ran across some other information that I might address next week because it's an interesting topic we've covered before. But it was new data or a new response, and so I sidetrack into reading that, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, I got to get ready for the stream. So anyway, I just was thinking to myself, like, I mean, probably everybody has seen The Matrix, and you know, when Neo gets the thing plugged into the back of his head and he's like, and all of a sudden he knows how to like do martial arts. I want that, but with quilt scholarship. I just want to be able to, like, you know, plug the book in the back of my head and now I know everything. Can't we count on that happening one day? You know, like, that's why I'm leaning into AI, because I keep thinking AI is gonna come up with something for us that allows us to do things like that. Wishful thinking, right? So anyway, what a terrible problem to have, right? Like, I can't read as much as I want to read. Anyway, long story short, today's a little bit of a bittersweet topic, but I think it's an important one, and I wanted to cover it. And that is the life and times of Dr. Virginia L. Gunn. You may remember, if you follow Jill and I on quilt nerding, a while back we were looking at a few auctions, and one of the auctions we kind of peeked into was an auction of Virginia Gunn's collections. And at the time, you know, I'm not sure if she was living in, you know, like an assisted living, or I don't know what the nature of her illness or whatever was. But her collections were being auctioned, and but she was still alive. Unfortunately, she has passed away. I believe it was last week, and you know, I'm on a I don't even know what you call it. It's one of those bulletin board list kind of things, like from the 90s. Those actually still exist in quilt study, believe it or not. And I am on one, and the news kind of broke there. That's where I found out about it. And then all week, people have been just responding to the post and talking about, just, you know, briefly about how she influenced them, how kind she was, how, you know, helpful she was, and you know, how important quilt and textile scholarship was to her. She dabbled in, well, I don't even want to say dabbled. I mean, she she was a professor. So she worked in both costume and textiles as well as quilt study. She wrote many papers for Uncoverings, the journal of the American Quilt Study Group. She was president and editor at different periods. I don't know that they overlapped. So I don't think she was a founding member of the American Quilt Study Group, but she was on the scene like within a couple years. And she served, like I said, she served as president. She served on the advisory board, and she served as the editor for Uncoverings for a number of years. So huge accomplishments, and her work was, very, very important. I mean, there's sort of this group of women that I look up to, and a number of them are still with us, and I consider them friends. And then a number of them, unfortunately, we're starting to lose because, I mean, these were women that were getting started in quilt scholarship like in the 80s. And, when they were, many of them were either at a certain point in their career, or they were, done raising a family. So, they were older as we're getting into the 80s. And so the unfortunate reality is we're starting to lose, some people that we look up to. And, before seminar, I want to say there was like 4 or 5 people that had passed away in the past year. So it's sad and it's unfortunate. But what I can say is Dr. Virginia Gunn left behind an amazing legacy. And I just wanted to read a few things about her. And then I want to read, I don't think it's her earliest paper. I think it's her second paper in Uncoverings. It was from 1984. What a year, 1984. Was Big Brother really watching? No more so than in 2024. But the paper, because it's about crazy quilts and it pertains to something I'm researching now, I thought, 2 birds, 1 stone. I'm going to, stomp all over some copyright and read it. It is from the 80s. It is publicly available. So this is where I kind of get, I'm going to ask for forgiveness and not for permission in cases like that. And just, to honor her memory. And I'm really sad I never got to meet her, but I have met so many people that she influenced. And, I from the perspective of, I suspect there are people that were, just in terms of beginning or continuing their scholarship in quilt studies, and textile costume studies. I suspect that she probably influenced a lot of people to either get started, keep going, etc. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Virginia Gunn. And I apologize today. One of my monitors, out of the blue, just went poop. I plugged my laptop in. It was working yesterday. Today, it's gone. And it's my primary big monitor. So I'm working with a laptop monitor and a travel monitor. So just to let you know, I'm always discombobbled, but today I'm especially so. So let me, we're going to kind of go no frills today. You're going to have to look at me while I read. When we get to reading the Patchwork Girl, I'll put something on the screen for you to look at besides me. So this is what they have to say about Dr. Gunn in, this is the Daily Record in, I guess it's the Daily Record in Wooster, Ohio, is best I can tell. I did find a couple of other articles about her in the Daily Record, and she's she lived in Ohio. So anyway, without further ado, Virginia Lee Railsback Gunn, 86, died peacefully on November 26, 2025 at Danbury Woods in Wooster, Ohio. She was born on July 20th, 1939 in Little Rock, Arkansas to Lee and Helen Railsback, and was raised in Ellsworth, Minnesota. Virginia attended Kansas State University, where she earned a Bachelor of Science in Home Economics and Education. There she met Charles Douglas Gunn, whom she married on August 19th, 1961 in Manhattan, Kansas. I didn't know there was a Manhattan in Kansas. She later received a master's degree in applied arts, clothing, textiles, and interiors from Syracuse University, and a PhD in history from the University of Akron. A lifelong teacher, she touched countless lives from East Haven Junior High School in Connecticut in the 1960s to her 40-plus years as a professor at the University of Akron. She presented and published research on women's history, textiles, quilts, coverlets, American costume, decorative arts, and antiques, with a focused interest in those from Wayne County and the greater Ohio area. Instrumental in the restoration of the Raisin Beale House, she served on the Board of Trustees of the Wayne County Historical Society. And as a side note, I read somewhere else that she actually was instrumental in founding the Historical Society. So she wasn't just a board of trustees. She was also a founder, which trustees and foundership kind of maybe go together, I guess. So she received the Alvin Rich Lifetime Achievement Award from the WCHS, Wayne County Historical Society, in 2021. In 2017, a 2017 inductee into the Quilters Hall of Fame, she was also a former president and board member of the American Quilt Study Group, a board member of the Museum of the American Coverlet in Bedford, Pennsylvania. I had not heard of that. And a member of the Museum Committee and textile consultant to the Summit County Historical Society. I'm not sure where that is. Summit County. It could be Ohio, I guess. But seemingly that she traveled quite a bit in her life. She lived a lot of places, and I'm assuming it was both her scholarship and possibly what her husband worked in, because it doesn't say, that probably took her to all these different areas. So she had her hands in lots of different stuff, which is just amazing. She additionally served as a costume textile consultant for the Stark County Historical Society, the Twinsburg Historical Society, the Hauer House Victorian Museum, and the Stan Highwit Hall and Gardens Foundation. So I'm not familiar with some of these, but again, these are these great organizations in the U.S. that preserve history and are pushing forward scholarship and all of these topics. She is survived by her sons Eric Gunn and Peter Gunn, and her granddaughter Alice Gunn. I'm assuming Peter Gunn was born before that instrumental song Peter Gunn came out in the 80s or the 70s, whenever. Her parents, husband Charles, sister Beth, and daughter Lacey Elizabeth preceded her in death. So I think that was a lovely tribute to her. And then some of this is going to be a little bit redundant, but I wanted to read her 2017 induction article, which is by Karen Alexander, who is a member of American Quilt Study Group. Let's see. Okay, so Virginia Gunn, 2017 honoree. When it comes to being passionate about a subject, particularly research on historic textiles and their makers, few equal Gunn's determination and enthusiasm to unravel the identities of the early craftspeople and the techniques they employed. Daily Record, Wooster, Ohio, June 2014. So she was written up in this Daily Record newspaper quite frequently. I mean, I now see like 4 different articles about her. Unfortunately, to see any more, I have to subscribe. And being that I am not in Wooster nor Ohio, I'm not going to subscribe. So sorry, Wooster, Ohio. Born in Arkansas but raised in Minnesota, Virginia L. Gunn earned her Bachelor of Science degree at Kansas State University, a master's degree in applied arts, clothing, textiles, and interiors from Syracuse, and a PhD in history from the University of Akron. Again, this is, remember, 2017. So today, Gunn is in demand as a speaker nationwide, presenting and publishing research on American costumes and textiles, on quilts and coverlets, and on women's history. All things that are just, make my heart swell with happiness. In 1980, when the American Quilt Study Group was founded, there were no graduate programs offering degrees in quilt history, no academic gatherings in which to present scholarly papers on quilts, no journals in which to publish scholarly research. All three conditions have changed dramatically since 1980. Dr. Virginia Gunn has played a vital role in the reordering of this disparity within the academic world since the days of such desert conditions for quilt scholarship. Virginia Gunn has also demonstrated a gifted ability to inspire, motivate, and empower those who have an interest in doing quilt research outside the purely academic community through her long association with the American Quilt Study Group. And so I think this is one of those things that I hear from people, both academics and non-academics, that she was instrumental in both of their research. So, not just within this academic environment, but she was also supporting people that, were not part of any kind of academic organization. Her influence and hands-on guidance of others in maintaining the highest standards of scholarship in AQSG's publications has played no small part in the acceptance of said publications in at least 8 academic indexes that are accessed by researchers, museum curators, and academics from around the world. Virginia served on the AQSG National Board of Directors for a decade, 1984 to 94, and as the president of the board from 1990 to 1994. In addition, Virginia served as editor of Uncoverings, the annual volume of AQSG research papers from 94 to 2003, and served on the Scholarship Review Committee from 2004 to 2013. She has presented 11 research papers of her own. 11! That's a lot of writing and research. And presentations at other academic venues throughout her career in the field of quilt history, women's domestic social history and care, and conservation of quilts and other textiles. What makes her particularly valuable to anyone studying local and state history in her adopted state of Ohio is her knowledge of decorative arts, material culture, and historical methodology. Gunn continually emphasizes to all her students and volunteers alike the importance of well-developed research to figure things out. In her position as a faculty member at University of Akron, Virginia Gunn has worked successfully at encouraging a younger generation to explore and pursue the field of quilt and textile history. Bravo. In 1997, the Dr. Virginia L. Gunn Scholarship in Family and Consumer Sciences was created through a gift from a former University of Akron student to recognize and honor the mentoring and encouragement that Dr. Gunn has provided so many. This is a powerful statement about how deeply Gunn's dedication to education within the field of quilt and textile history has touched and will continue to impact students for generations to come. It is with great enthusiasm and respect that we salute Dr. Virginia L. Gunn as the Quilters Hall of Fame 2017 honoree. So I think that was really lovely. And what I would like to share to let you guys know what I'm on the prowl for are 2 of her books. One is called Treasures from Trunks. I think not to be confused with Treasures in the Trunk, which is a Mary Bywater Cross book. You get to a point where there's like only so many titles that you can give quilt study books or quilt scholarship books. But anyway, this is one that is very much on the pricey end. It's one of those symposium type of books. So that one is kind of on my wish list. But this other one I am so fascinated by. And it's called The History and Magic of Honeycomb. And she wrote it with Dr. Jeanette Lasansky, who unfortunately is also deceased. But Jeanette Lasansky was also an incredible researcher. And her focus is Pennsylvania Dutch stuff. So she was in Pennsylvania. And she did a lot of work with, Pennsylvania Dutch concepts and quilts and textiles and all of this stuff. And so I've read some of her papers, and she had a symposium as well in Pennsylvania. But so the history and magic of honeycomb, and we're not talking about bees. We're talking about honeycomb, like the paper honeycomb. And let me show you a picture. Bear with me because and of course, okay. So this is just a thumbnail of the book over here, right above the chat. All right, where's my cursor? Here we go. Right here. See this clown? And you probably recognize. I'm sorry that it's a thumbnail. I'll have to see if I can find the bigger picture of it. But the clown's arms and legs are paper honeycomb, and you guys know what this is. You've seen it. You know, kids' birthday parties, and you've got the honeycomb decorations in the middle of the table. Those horrible honeycomb bells that they used to have at like wedding receptions in the 80s. All of that stuff. And so apparently this book, I read the kind of information about the book, and they examine the use of the honeycomb for decorations. And then they look at how like this honeycomb structure is used in like scientific and industrial applications. So like you know, mind blowing to me that they landed on this like really sort of niche topic, and then, you know, explored it into this like, you know, much bigger topic. It's just so interesting to me. And it's like one of those things that, you know, when you start exploring material culture, you know, you certainly some objects don't have a particularly interesting history. But other things, you know, when you find out like, you know, where something evolved from, or, you know, how it came about, or what did they use this thing for, you know, it's so fascinating. And, you know, I have such respect for the dedication to, you know, take a deep dive into like such a niche topic. So anyway, that's also on my wish list. I found copies of both of these, and so because I've already invested my my early Christmas presents in books, hopefully early 2026 I'll get my hands on those too. But all that said, I would like to read from one of her papers, and let me get reoriented here. Okay, that is that one. There we go. Is this the one? Nope. Sorry, guys. Not having this, my extra monitor is like so disorienting. Because it's the monitor in the middle. It's the monitor that I go all the way across to the third one and drop the things that, you know. Okay. Where are you? All right. So here is the paper, which we shall read. All right. So yeah, sorry, you're just gonna have to look at my big head. I don't have anything good to put on the screen for this. And let me reorient this. What a pain in the rear. And then, let's see. All the things that I try to keep on the screen to look at and monitor. Okay. I think we're there. Okay. So, as I said, this paper she wrote in the early 80s, and it was included in the 1984 issue of Uncumberings, which, as you guys know, you've heard me talk about it a million times. But if you're new here, it is the journal of the American Quilt Study Group. It contains every year a handful of papers that are written by quilt scholars, both academic and independent. And so this one is not, as I said, it's not her first paper for AQSG. I think it's her second. And this one's a little bit shorter. Some of the reasons why I don't often read papers, aside from the fact that, you know, the copyright issue, they're often very long and with, sometimes not a whole lot of imagery. So anyway, all right. So Uncoverings, 1984. The paper is called Crazy Quilts and Outline Quilts, which outline quilts is interesting. I'm not sure exactly what that is, and so we're going to find out. And of course, we know crazy quilts. Popular responses to the decorative art needlework movement, 1876 to 1893, by Virginia Gunn. In the decade following the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, what came to be known as a decorative art craze swept across America. This craze would have a profound effect on decorating and quilt making in the Gilded Age between 1876 and 1893. Americans believed that the centennial had stimulated this development of art and that no areas had profited by it more than those connected with the furnishing and decoration of the home. What happened very similar to this in many of our lifetimes? The bicentennial. Same thing happened. And by the way, let me put the link in here. So if you guys want to look this up later, read along, you'll have the link. Okay. Women were encouraged to experiment with new aesthetic styles and ideas in decorating. East Lake or Queen Anne furniture became the fashionable replacement for the Victorian rosewood and walnut rococo styles, which had reigned supreme for over 30 years. Art needlework embroidery began to replace the old-fashioned Berlin canvas work. Entrepreneurs and tradesmen encouraged the new aesthetic trends in furnishing and adorning homes, sensing that they would enjoy commercial advantages. This interest in artistic homes was part of the aesthetic movement originating in England in the 1860s under the leadership of thinkers and artists such as John Ruskin and William Morris. William Morris of wallpaper fame. The household art phase of this movement stressed that the home was the foundation of all that is good, and that whatever made the home more attractive, more beautiful, more useful, was worthy of the attention and thought of the noblest and best of men and women. A beautiful home would lift the morality and productivity of the people living in it. While experts noted that tendency of art is towards cost and luxury, they also stressed that in furnishing the home, every man or woman, rich or poor, should find a field for the display of individual taste. I love that. To aid this process, many felt that the country needed an institution that would establish a standard of taste which would preclude the possibility of the acceptance with any degree of toleration of such enormities as are now thrust upon the public. Okay, well, that's getting a little snooty. The Philadelphia Centennial would provide the stimulus for the formation of such taste-setting institutions. Within 2 years of this exhibition, a growing number of art schools, decorative art societies, and women's exchanges were established in cities and towns across the country. Philadelphia had one of these. New journals such as the Art Journal, the Art Amateur, and the Art Interchange began serving those interested in household and decorative art. The Art Amateur summarized the trend. Art societies have sprung up all over the country. It is the fashion to talk about art and, in a fashionable way, to practice it. Young ladies... Forgot to turn off my phone, sorry. Young ladies, instead of spending their mornings at the piano, take lessons in painting on china, in oils or watercolors, or ply their nimble fingers in the production of art needlework. This paper will explore the role of the decorative art societies, societies of art needlework or women's exchanges, in shaping the form of quilt making from 1876 to 1893. And as you've probably heard me say before, this period is the explosion of crazy quilts, with the pinnacle being approximately 1883, 1886. The quilts I have that are crazy quilts, the ones that are dated, are 1883. I think all of them. But I have seen many other crazy quilts that have different dates on them. Proliferating after the Centennial Exhibition, they became taste setters during the household art phase of America's aesthetic movement. By promoting new types of embroidered bed coverings and rejecting calico patchwork as artistic needlework, these organizations influenced women's quilt making decisions. Women wishing to participate in the art movement and to continue making quilts required new forms of expression. Crazy quilts and outline quilts emerged as grassroots responses to aesthetic movement fashions. In the 1860s and early 1870s, sophisticated people no longer chose traditional calico quilts or woven coverlets for their beds. These were replaced or covered with white Marseille spreads and other commercial spreads. According to one contemporary needlework expert, patchwork now fell more under the head of plain than fancy needlework. Calico squares were useful for teaching little girls to sew, or for old women who no longer being able to conquer the intricacies of fine work, will still make patchwork quilts for coming generations. While some beautiful specimens were occasionally seen at fancy fairs or country fairs, the taste is one that has nearly died out. The reviewer who covered the Centennial exhibition for Arthur's Magazine was not taken with American patchwork. She grouped it in the same category with the abomination of worsted embroidery, horrible to behold, and reported that we saw some little patchwork, though not an abundance of it, we are happy to state. And every kind of quilting seems to get, seriously lambasted at some point. In Frank Leslie's historical register of the Centennial Exposition, only one American quilt was described. This so-called quilt, sent by a woman from Alabama, was not the traditional type. It had a white satin background on which were embroidered 1,500 roses and rosebuds. Wow. In each of which there are from 500 to 900 stitches. 7,000 skeins of silk were used in this work, and a lady was engaged upon it 18 months. 7,000 skeins of silk. I mean, silk generally came in small quantities, but 7,000 of them. Good Lord. I mean, even at very cheap, a penny each. That's still a lot of money for that time to buy all that silk. Obviously, there was still an interest in demanding decorative work. Many reviews of the Centennial Exhibition paid particular attention to the Japanese display, which was the most extensive ever shown in the Western world. So if you think about the societies, the dynasties over in Asia were closed. They closed themselves off. At some point, I don't remember the dates. I took some classes in college and terrible with dates, so I didn't retain any of that. But they were very exclusionary. They closed their walls and their doors to metaphorically to any outsiders. So when these Asian countries started opening up to trade, etc., this was amazing and so new. And so the Victorian era, of course, just fell in love with, Japanese and Chinese art and textiles and all this stuff. And so it gets to the point where it's pretty racist, because there was just adoption and bastardization of all of this artwork and cultural significance. So, in any event, you'll often see Asian motifs and things and all this stuff, and I'm sure she's going to talk about this. But yeah, that's something they something else I was reading recently talked about the Japanification of this era. So the Japanese display. Visitors were treated to the full flower and glory of Japanese art and could admire wonderful bronzes, embroideries, costumes, silk textiles, and decorative screens. One author felt that the Japanese and Chinese displays were more artistic, beautiful, and attractive than those of any other nation, and predicted that they would exert a wide and positive influence upon American art industries. And that person was correct. He also forecast that this influence would not take the form of direct copying, but would instead be expressed in design attempts to capture the originality and poetic feeling which give to Japanese art its distinctive character. It's some of that direct copying or influence that gets a little off the rails. Oh my gosh! Hi, Kenny! It's been so long. It's so good to see you. The exhibit of the Royal School of Art Needlework from Kensington, England was also popular. The Royal School of Needlework. This school was established in 1872 for the twofold purpose of restoring ornamental needlework to the high place it once held among decorative arts, while at the same time supplying a suitable employment for poor gentlewomen. Needy gentlewomen completed a 3-year training program in art needlework. They were then paid to execute designs copied from antique sources or drawn by leading aesthetic designers like William Morris, Walter Crane, and Fairfax Wade. The ladies worked in anonymous privacy at the school's workrooms, and their embroidered articles were sold in a sales room maintained by the school. So very unfortunate that, these ladies sort of, worked anonymously, and that, any of these embroidered items would just be labeled Royal School of Needlework and not, not having an actual artist's name associated with them. But they were copying them, and it wasn't an original piece. It may not have mattered to them. I don't know. I still think that, right, Kenny, if any of this stuff survives, I'm sure it does. This was, they were only founded in 1872. And I laugh at myself when I say things like that, because once upon a time, even 1950 was like a million years ago to me. And now I'm like, well, 1872, that wasn't that long ago. Weird things happen when you align yourself with the times of yore to learn about what they were up to. And I what I would say is, and I did not, when I was in England recently, I didn't get to go to the Royal School of Needlework, although you can go there and get like a little tour of some parts. I do know that they have stuff in their archives, so I'm sure that examples of all of these things exist. The Royal School's art needlework display at the Centennial included embroidered bedspreads with patterns based on medieval or Renaissance designs, or a conventional treatment of botanical subjects. While taste setters would later remember that beautifully embroidered quilts formed the most practical feature of the display of decorative art needlework, immediate reactions to these new embroideries were mixed. Peterson's magazine admired the harmonious effect of Fairfax Wade's arabesque design, but felt the spread was marred by the insertion of coarse lace. Arthur's magazine described a number of the bedspreads, but felt that beyond richness of material, brilliancy of coloring, and elaborateness of design, there was little to recommend those things. Well, you just named 3 reasons why they're pretty cool. It appears that admiration of this new work was something that had to be learned over time. However, the Royal School's idea of doing needlework for gainful employment was appealing. The Civil War and the early 1870s depression had thrown an increasing number of middle-class wives into the category of reduced ladies who needed to earn their own living or supplement their husbands' meager wages. And in some cases, these were women that their husbands died during the Civil War, and they were widows and often trying to raise children, etc. Women were looking for new ways to earn money respectably. Opportunities for women's employment were quite limited, especially for women not educated to teach. Domestic work, sales work, or factory work held little appeal to the middle-class women. One of the visitors to the Royal School's display was Mrs. Candace Wheeler, a woman who moved in the art circles of New York City. Aware of friends who needed to discreetly supplement their incomes, she was happy to find that the new art needlework did not look too complicated. Skilled in needlework herself, she felt the designs and techniques involved were simple enough to make a similar project feasible in America. After returning to New York City and testing the idea with friends, Mrs. Wheeler worked to establish a similar institution. The New York Society of Decorative Arts was formed in the spring of 1877. New York socialite Mrs. David Lane was asked to be president. She formed a board of directors composed of the social and intellectual elite of the city. With the backing of the wealthy and influential, the society was assured of receiving favorable publicity for its activities and displays. The society... Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on a second, you guys. I'm so sorry that my phone will not stop. All right, maybe it'll be quiet now. She formed a board of directors composed of socially. With the backing of the wealthy and influential, the society was assured of receiving favorable publicity for its activities and displays. The society began to offer classes in decorative art techniques. A teacher, Mrs. Pode, was imported from England. She was imported. She didn't travel here. She was imported from England to direct the classes in art needlework. In October 1877, the society opened a sales room at number 4 East 20th Street for sculpture, paintings, wood carvings, lacework, needlework, tapestries, hangings, and other decorative works selected from contributions sent chiefly by women from all parts of the country. That's cool. I've heard about a number of these needlework societies, but that's pretty neat that, they were focusing on showing, a sales room, showing this kind of stuff. While hoping to help needy gentlewomen, the society made no distinctions as to the class of contributors and was thus organized in a more democratic fashion than its English counterpart. And that's important, I think, from the perspective of what constitutes a gentlewoman. In England, the title of a gentlewoman or a gentleman are people that are of a higher class. They might be landed gentry, or they might be there kind of just below that class, and maybe their husbands were merchants, the yeoman class. That's very, very, England is still to some degree very class structured. And here in the U.S., that was one of the things, among others, that, colonists were fleeing England from. And so this democratic idea of maybe I'm poor, but I'm going to dress for the job I want. I think that, people being self-made men and women, that you can contribute to these things. And, honestly, I think in a lot of cases, people get even back then probably had, that idea of they were, not genuine, or are not up to that level. And so maybe they didn't contribute, items to these types of endeavors. What is the word I'm looking for? Why do I blank on these things? In any event, I think that is an important thing to look at in terms of, what was happening in England versus what was happening here in the U.S. I think women probably had some more opportunities here than they might have had in England. So anyway, so successful was the project that during its first 3 months, the society sold almost $5,000 worth of goods. Wow. The Art Journal noted that the society had received the sympathy and support of the intelligent public who had made its decisions authorities in matters of decorative art. Within a year, the society had flourishing branches in every state from Maine to Florida, and valuable auxiliaries in 17 different cities, including Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit. Called by a variety of names, these schools of art needlework or decorative art societies spread the ideals, values, and tastes of the original group from coast to coast. The cause was also helped when the New York Society began its own publication, the Art Interchange, on September 18, 1878. This publication was to be devoted to the subject of art as applied to household adornment, and gave instruction in silk, crewel, tapestry, and medieval embroideries, and full descriptions of all novel fancy work. Books such as Women's Handiwork in Modern Homes by Constance Cary Harrison, New York Scribners, 1881, used the society as the source for many ideas and helped spread its influence. The New York Society of Decorative Art remained the pace setter for taste nationally, although other schools and societies had wide influence as well. Scribner's monthly magazine did caution that probably in many cases the stream grows shallow as it gets away from the source, and the quality of work approved by the society deteriorates to the disadvantage of the latter's reputation. So essentially they were saying by letting, these other schools proliferate across the US, they were sort of degrading the original idea. These kind of things happen. And also, I think it was better to deteriorate the quality of the work. And I mean, when we say quality of work, some of the things that I'm sure they were making were like outrageously quality. And I think the democratic look at good enough is important also. As knowledge of the society spread, more and more women sent contributions of handiwork to be sold. Since most contributors were untrained amateurs, the society established a screening committee to accept or reject proffered items. Offerings which met the highest standard of excellence in form, color, and workmanship could be granted the society's seal of merit. If articles were unacceptable, they were returned, accompanied by a note from the secretary offering helpful suggestions. That's nice, if they were nice. The art amateur stated that a good standard of excellence in work has been maintained by a committee who set their faces as flint against artistic rubbish. I mean, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth here, right? Certain categories of mechanical work were not considered artistic, and leatherwork, knitting, Berlin wool work, skeletonized leaves, and much of the same class are on this ground invariably excluded. The society urged people to visit their sales rooms. There was no better way for workers to learn the right direction for their efforts than by seeing work which had passed the ordeal of a discriminating judgment and been found worthy of acceptance. That's always good advice. If you want to submit, your artwork or your writing, get to know your audience. Look and see what the other people are doing. I think that can be helpful. Mrs. Candace Wheeler, a member of the screening committee, began to feel rather early that philanthropy and art might not mix well. She knew that many well-made, useful items worthy of being sold had to be rejected by the society because they did not meet artistic standards. Oh my God. Craft versus art. This is what we're talking about. Feeling that a new type of market was needed, she left the society to help Mrs. William Choate found the Women's Exchange in the summer of 1878. The Women's Exchange had a more liberal acceptance policy, and its sales room featured domestic work such as bread, cakes, jams, and pickles, as well as decorative artwork and needlework in every form of plain and fancy sewing. The exchange idea was very successful. In the first year, the New York Women's Exchange paid out $10,252 to consignees. Exchanges were soon started in other cities. By 1892, 75 of the more than 100 exchanges which were established were still flourishing in 23 states. And I mean, again, I think this shows the fact that craft can be just as alluring to purchase as art. I suspect that people who purchase things from this New York Women's Exchange probably displayed these things in their homes. And so even here, we're looking at like this class system of high art versus low craft, Well, I guess it's good to know. It's always been going on, right? Demarest's magazine felt that to those interested in women's work as a study, learning what she could do if she could, the rooms of the exchange are more interesting than those of the older society. For this organization, having a charitable basis, a greater variety of work is accepted. With this in mind, it is interesting to reflect on Lucy Salmon's comments when she wrote about the exchanges for Forum magazine in 1892. She stated that the exchange had raised the standards of decorative and artistic needlework by incorporating into its rules a refusal to accept calico patchwork, wax, leather, hair, feather, rice, spatter, splinter, and cardboard work. These were all crafty materials and techniques. I do know that. This clearly indicates that calico patchwork was placed in a class with other unfashionable decorative arts, even by the institution that had less stringent artistic standards than the decorative art societies. That's unfortunate. Rejection of patchwork is seldom this explicit in articles published during the 1880s. This is understandable, for such a stand could have offended many rural subscribers, but such judgments can often be inferred from other remarks. In addition, traditional patchwork is never mentioned in descriptions of items on display in the sales rooms of either the society or the women's exchange. This reinforces the supposition that there was a ban of sorts on calico patchwork in many of the institutions, or in some of the institutions. Writing in 1921, Candace Wheeler recalled that after the middle of the 19th century, most patchwork was a farmhouse industry with narrow limits, although in the mountains of Kentucky and North Carolina, it still survives in its original painstaking excellence. That was probably a little bit true in 1921 because, quilting has always been important in different parts of the U.S., whether it is a decorative arts or it was, simply for keeping warm, or an expression of somebody's creativity. But in 1921, there has been a little bit of resurgence in the teens. But for the most part, women in the 20s were not quilting unless they had to. Again, this farmhouse industry is probably accurate. And not to say had to because of poverty, but, in rural areas, industry is sometimes a little bit behind, or was at the time. And so, yeah, spinning, weaving, those kind of things may have been taken over by the Industrial Revolution, but making a quilt was still something that I would say that many women who lived in rural areas, especially on farms and such, would have taken part in no matter what the decade. So Kenny has a question. I'd like to know about the exchanges in other cities. I know. She's mentioned Baltimore. I had no idea that Baltimore had something like that. I've done a little tiny bit of looking at some of the arts and agricultural fairs that were here. There was this one in Baltimore that was, I want to say it was kind of sponsored by the predecessor of the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I mean, literally they published like a book of all of the submissions and what people won. And there was everything from like machines and inventions and agricultural stuff all the way to like pages and pages of different types of needlework and, crafts and that kind of stuff. So yeah, exactly. New York. But what about Baltimore, Atlanta? Yeah. My guess is the New York stuff is probably better documented, unfortunately. It's clear that traditional patchwork quilts were not valued by taste-setting institutions of the new art needlework and decorative art movements. Therefore, if quilt makers wanted to incorporate these fashionable trends into their work, they would have to adapt their familiar forms in some way. The new art needlework movement put heavy emphasis on surface embroidery instead of counted work, which they considered to be mechanical and repetitious. Ideally, the new artistic needleworker would proceed in the following way. The embroiderer designs her own pattern and draws it directly on the material, shading and coloring according to her own fancy, so that every effective piece of crewel embroidery may be considered a work of art. And by the way, if you're new here, crewel does not mean like mean. It's a type of embroidery, and it's spelled Crewel. So, and it's typically done with wool. Yes, so Kenny says Kansas City was such a hub for commerce with the territories and states around it. Yeah. And like, wasn't Detroit as well kind of like, with that westward expansion? Yeah. Well, I mean, here's another thing for us to research, Kenny. There's an endless supply of things to look at, right? Before you got here, I was complaining about the fact that no matter how much I try, I'm never going to get everything read that I want to read and learn about. So, the needle artist was to paint with threads as an artist painted with a brush. Some women preferred painting on fabric to embroidery, and articles on silk painting appeared in magazines along with embroidery advice. Americans who embroidered soon developed a preference for working in silk thread on silk or plush fabrics instead of embroidering on crash with crewel yarns. I don't know what that is. I'm wondering if that's a typo or if that's just something I don't know. It's literally spelled Crash. With crewel yarns, as was more common in England. They also preferred natural and realistic designs to the conventional English ones and liked exotic designs from foreign cultures like Japan. So, yes, a current quilt I have that I'm studying has lots of this kind of exotic looking stuff. And oddly, like they've mixed pagodas with like little English children. So it's like this very fantastical kind of stuff. While ideal artwork would be totally original, most publications believed it was acceptable to use designs furnished by trained designers, since becoming proficient at design was held to be a matter of years of study. The Decorative Art Society encouraged originality, but if a thing be true, it need not be original. The intention of the society began to encourage artwork and not merely to preside over the development of genius. In fact, it was far better to use a good design by someone else than a poor one of your own. Yep. Yes, Kenny, absolutely. The Kansas City Star was one of the earliest papers to publish quilt blocks, quilt patterns. You know, Kenny's referring to, I guess, they probably started in the 20s, the late 20s, I think. In the 1930s were absolutely rife with newspaper quilt patterns. You know, so it would be like once a week, a new block, or etc. Or here's how to make these old patterns. And Kansas City Star is definitely one of the pioneers in that. And there's a lot of contemporary books that have been written about it. In January 1881, Harper's Bazaar announced that they were the first to have the privilege of publishing designs from the Kensington Royal School of Art Needlework, a feat they considered proof of rare journalistic experience. They also published designs from the Decorative Art Society and stated they were happy to cooperate with both groups in their praiseworthy endeavors to disseminate and popularize a knowledge of the true principles of household art and thus to beautify the homes of the people. The Royal School's designs bore a distinctive logo which distinguished their authentic designs from attempted copies. And I believe they still have that. The designs were given in black and white outline form with no indication of how they were to be shaded and only meager color suggestions, if any. Making a wise selection and placement of colors was felt to be difficult. Many women preferred to merely outline the design using a well-known stem or outline stitch, which came to be called the Kensington stitch for outline embroidery. Okay, so this is what she's talking about with these outline quilts. So I'm thinking we're talking about like the kind of embroidery that turned into red work. And that is very popular at the end of the 19th century, early 20th. So I can see that. I think what she's talking about are these embroidery designs, which they would women would embroider on blocks, and we've seen these. Like sometimes they're very big blocks with very large embroidery, but it is all outline. There is none of that beautiful shading that takes a long time to do. And I mean, I have college experience, academic experience in embroidery doesn't even come close to touching what they do at the Royal School of Needlework. So yeah, and that kind of needlework is really probably outside of the experience, the abilities of somebody who is not experienced in it or who hasn't given it a try and worked on it. Because there is some understanding of how the shading and all that stuff goes. I'm not saying somebody who's not trained couldn't do it, but I see now what she's talking about as far as outline. So let's keep going. The J.F. Ingalls Company Stated, if embroidery is new to you, the outline work is best to commence on, as it is much easier to make than the Kensington embroidery and requires no shading. Women realized that for outline work, many designs would be found simple and easy to work, which would be impossible in crewels. Even the taste setters found well-designed outline work acceptable for bed quilts or coverlets. The New York Society of Decorative Art had a special category for outline work on silk at the 1881 exhibition. The prize-winning design for an outlined baby blanket was published in Harper's Bazaar. Arthur's Magazine suggested copying Kate Greenaway figures from nursery books to make an outline quilt. Oh, sorry, Kenny. Kate Greenaway, she is often, her illustrations, and again, like if you know quilts, you've seen them. They're very, very predominant on embroidered crazy quilts, and any kind of like this kind of embroidered stuff, red work, etc. Her illustrations are also possibly said to be kind of a precursor to Sunbonnet Sue, just based on the fact that she did these kind of sweet sort of twee like children, and that inspired the artist who did the early Sunbonnet Babies, Bertha, I can't think of her last name. But anyway, so Kate Greenaway figures are so very popular. And actually, do I have them still? I actually had a reproduction thing on my desk of some paper, Kate Greenaway stuff, but I must have moved it. I probably filed it away. Yeah, I probably filed it away. I have lots of pictures of Kate Greenaway stuff on this quilt I'm studying, and I introduced you to that quilt before Thanksgiving a while back. I will reintroduce it very soon because I've taken more pictures. I've looked at things. I have some study to report. Okay. Most art publications and women's magazines use the term quilt very loosely. The directions usually indicate that they are suggesting a lined or hemmed bed covering when they write of quilts. The art amateur recognized this and explained, "A quilt means, properly speaking, something quilted, i.e. wadded and sewn down. In these days, and with the decorative end in view, such very elaborate work hardly repays the time spent on it, but the coverlet is to be recommended as an excellent object for work and for design." Okay, so the coverlet is better than the quilt. Outline work in one color is very suitable for this purpose, and a bold formal pattern looks very handsome. Actually, you know what? Let me very quickly, I'm going to show you. Hopefully this isn't going to lose my place. Let me show you guys exactly what we're talking about here, just in case you don't know the Kate Greenaway stuff. So my other screen, here we go. So this is what we're talking about. Particularly this girl with the big bonnet feeding a bird. That little girl and her little friends are all over crazy quilts. She's skipping rope. She's feeding birds. She's hanging out with her little friends. She's very, very common, and little children like her. These two don't look as familiar to me. And, you know, I mean, there's any number of reasons. Maybe they just weren't as commonplace as these other little children. But anyway, you surely recognize this child and her ilk. So, all right, let me swap-a-roo back. Okay. While the taste setters generally had an embroidered spread in mind, many women familiar with traditional patchwork techniques preferred to combine their outline embroidery with proper quilting. It was easy for them to embroider outline patterns on familiar blocks, set them together, and quilt them in the traditional way. The majority of these outline quilts were made for children and were meant to be used and washed. Therefore, women usually outlined with turkey red, there's your red work, or blue cotton embroidery floss, the most color fast yarns. And I don't know a whole lot about embroidery floss, etc. at that time, but we do know that turkey red is, the important red of the era. When turkey red was discovered, and it's the process of making, it's not that it's necessarily has anything to do with turkeys or Turkey the country. It was the process came from the Middle East, but not necessarily it's not necessarily a Turkish process, but it's a very extensive process that creates a very bright, vibrant red. You know it if you've seen it, and it doesn't bleed. It isn't fugitive. It utilizes oil at some point in its creation. So I think that is, and I know that is the proliferation of red work at this time period. I have also seen, I actually have some pearl cotton. It's done in pink, a pink pearl cotton one, and those are loose blocks. And I'm trying to think if I have any in blue. I probably do somewhere. Yes, Louisa May Alcott was founder of the Women's Educational and Industrial Union in Boston. Yeah, it's amazing what some of these women were like involved in, that, their name, Louisa May Alcott as an author, but then you find out like all of the other things that they did, and you're just like, these women are amazing. Publications offered outline designs from the leading schools and societies, as well as other sources. Needy artists found creating such designs a good way to raise money. Since there were no copyright laws, designs from the most prestigious sources were frequently pirated and copied. Eventually, opportunistic entrepreneurs flooded the market with inexpensive designs. Companies such as J.F. Ingalls and T.E. Parker of Lynn, Massachusetts, advertised pattern catalogs in the backs of women's magazines. The taste setters warned that many of the patterns commonly sold in the stores are utterly valueless. Mrs. Julian Hawthorne informed readers of Harper's Bazaar that designs from nursery tales illustrated by badly drawn, oddly dressed children may be fashionable, but they are not necessarily artistic. In spite of this criticism, outline embroidery became popular because it was very effective, very rapidly done, and very cheap. And I know one of the things that I think they sold like in general stores were penny squares. And I think these were, they were little blocks that kind of, like, I know like the Columbian Exposition, they sold the penny squares there, with an image stamped on it for the purpose of doing these red work and other types of outlining. These outline quilts allowed quilt makers to continue their traditional skills while incorporating new fashions in outline and art needlework. However, these practical, washable quilts did not satisfy all needs to create something ornamental, decorative, and individual. Yeah, because if it's all one color, it's pretty, but... However, these practical, washable quilts did not... quilters are familiar with the fancy silk fabrics and embroidery used on portieres and screens in the homes of the fashionable elite. Women's periodicals and art journals often described magnificent home furnishings made for the wealthy. They believed, as did Harper's Bazaar, that the rare and beautiful things furnishing the grand drawing rooms of millionaires are of interest, mainly because they set the fashions for the simpler things used by people of small means. And I think that was a fancy way of saying what Miranda, what's her name? Was it Miranda Priestley? In The Devil Wears Prada. which is something to the effect of, you think that you chose that ugly blue sweater, but let me explain to you that long before you dragged that thing out of a bargain bin at Dress Barn. It's basically what she's saying. What they're saying here. Harper's Bazaar is saying here. Quilt makers must have found the crazy quilt a perfect solution for imitating the fashion trends and incorporating them into the quilt making process. The exact origin of the crazy quilt was discussed in the periodicals of the early 1880s. Many were willing to hazard a guess, but no one was certain, though most would probably have agreed with Demarists that the crazy quilt came in with what is rudely denominated the decorative craze. And I think that it's kind of, I mean, I think most people just tend to agree that, you know, this late Victorian era desire for over decoration and just a suffocating amount of lace and doilies and all that crap, you know, that's when crazy quilts were also, you know, this kind of romanticization of this decorative stuff. And you know, and along with the fact that we've got that pinnacle in the 1880s, I mean, I think this is pretty clear to most scholars. It is likely that crazy quilts were a grassroots response to the decorative art movement. The first descriptions of this new type of needlework appearing in popular women's magazines were rather vague, and the technique remained unnamed. For example, in November 1879, Peterson's magazine, describing table covers, reported a new work, which consists of scraps of all kinds being appliqued onto serge, which is a type of fabric, and ornamented with colored silks in imitation of Eastern work. Janet Retz, writing for Demarists, states that the old patchwork quilts, which usurped so large a portion of our grandmother's time, are replaced by others made in a more elaborate style, which, if well done, are quite Eastern in effect. I do not think that they are Eastern at all, other than these attempts at Eastern embroidery. These quilts were quite bewildering in their combination of colors and stuffs, indeed. Harper's Bazaar said that we have quite discarded in our modern quilts the regular geometric design once so popular, and substituted what are more like the changing figures of the kaleidoscope or the beauty and infinite variety of Oriental mosaics. The fact that these descriptions appeared first in editorial columns rather than in the work table sections of the magazines suggests that crazy quilts were observed rather than introduced by these periodicals. Editors recognized Oriental influence. Several of them felt this new work was related to mid-Victorian silk template quilts, often called mosaic patchwork. And those you might know those too, where, you know, it's the English paper piecing, basically. However, crazy quilts were not made by cutting irregular templates. Instead, the technique used on the well-known log cabin quilts was adapted. So basically what she's saying is that, you know, they would take a block, put down a piece of fabric, and then like go around it with their scraps and bits. Traditional quilt makers were very familiar with the pressed patchwork method of fashioning log cabin strips by adding strips of wool, cotton, or silk to a foundation or background fabric. It would be easy to understand how an asymmetrical arrangement of silk strips around an irregular center might be considered a Japanese effect. If combined with embroidery and art needlework designs, all the fashionable decorating trends could be incorporated in one unique grassroots interpretation. Hedda Ward supported this theory of development when she wrote the following. Careful housewives have always hoarded their bright bits of silk and old ribbons, and years ago these were fashioned with painful regularity and great labor into what was called log cabin bedspreads. Of late years, these same bits of bright silk have been again used for bedspreads, but put together in a happy hit-or-miss fashion, joined with a slight line of embroidery and called Japanese bedspreads. Interesting. I have never seen this. Oh my gosh. Kenny has found something for me. We'll have to look at that in a minute. Little tiny blocks. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine. The decorative art societies probably did not introduce crazy work in their workrooms, since these were under the direction of an English needleworker and favored the type of conventional embroidery produced in England. It is likely that crazy quilts were first introduced to the societies by some contributor to the sales rooms rather than by an instructor. At any rate, the taste setters recognized the work and felt that if it was properly done, it offered an opportunity for really artistic work. In October 1882, the Art Amateur presented its first article on crazy quilts. The editor noted that when the present favorite style of quilt was introduced, it was called the Japanese, but the national sense of humor has been too keen, and the Japanese is now generally known as the crazy quilt. This is so interesting. I never seen this reference to, Japanese bedspreads or Japanese quilt. But I mean, she's pulling this directly out of, these extemporaneous magazines and publications. So that's wild. There is a method in its madness, however, and put together with a good understanding of color effects, the crazy quilt may prove an artistic piece of work. So many people disagreed with that. The description of the technique given in this article reveals that crazy quilts were fully developed by 1882. The article states, the foundation of the crazy quilt consists of patches of calico or any other humble material 10 inches square. On each of these squares is laid a large irregular piece of silk, the largest used in the square, which is called the starter. This is interesting because, this is instructions for making a crazy quilt. And I don't know, outside of really modern things, that I've ever seen anything like this. So this large piece is called the starter. It is usually placed at some angle covering the center, and it is advisable that this piece be of some light plain color. The rest of the square is then filled up with odd pieces of silk, which are simply overlapped and basted down, with the raw edges turned in. The overlapping seams are covered with fancy stitches in silk, filoselle, aracene, or gold thread. Oh, I haven't seen gold thread. I don't know. Probably those are probably in museums. Crazy quilts with gold thread. The herringbone is the simplest form of stitch used, but it is generally employed in combinations of color and with the addition of point rousse, cross stitch, feather stitch, and every sort, in fact, which the ingenious fingers of women can devise. It is impossible to give directions in this respect. The individual fancy should have free play and nothing will come amiss. These stitches are not confined to the seams, but are used at discretion in the body of the pieces, or wherever the needlewoman's fancy may direct. Applique work is also sometimes employed in the pieces. Sunflowers and daisies and other stuffs, such as velvet and plush, may be introduced, together with Greek vases, Japanese teapots, and Etruscan jars. This is done, however, with doubtful taste. The author of this article suggests that on this last and supremest development of the crazy quilt, the results are often handsome enough to warrant the enthusiasm and industry expected in producing them. There is a warning, however, against cluttering the surface with odd things that would look good on close inspection but would add nothing to the general effect. This comment indicates an awareness that crazy quilts were made to be admired and inspected often at close range. And I mean, yeah, how many of us see a crazy quilt, maybe in an antique store or a museum, or maybe you own one. And the thing that you're going to do first is kind of survey it and look for something bizarre or something that catches your eye. And then you go and you look closely. I've never seen anybody just kind of look at a crazy quilt and love them or hate them. There's always something to find in a crazy quilt. This comment indicates an awareness, often at close range. Women made these quilts to be shown off as works of art. It was felt that the piece de resistance of crazy work was the bedspread, and Harper's Bazaar wrote that such a work deserves to be handed down to posterity as an heirloom. The size of the crazy quilt is usually smaller than traditional bed coverings, for these quilts, even when used on a bed, are not tucked in like ordinary ones. Godey's Lady's Book stated that ornamental coverlets are rarely made full size. They lay on top of the bed after it is made over the ordinary white quilt. This manner of use allowed them to be seen and admired. While crazy quilts were usually artistic masterpieces for the maker's own homes, some were also made for sale. Demarists reported that these quilts are seen occasionally in shop windows marked with fabulous prices. They reportedly sold at $75 to $100. One with Oscar Wilde and sunflowers sold at a fair for $150. And what she is referring to, Oscar Wilde, he was a very popular figure during this time, and there are images, and I don't think it was anything that was like actually printed, like as a handkerchief or as a fabric or anything, but I think they would ink images of him and put them in the quilts. And I've seen, I want to say Barbara Brackman has a blog post that shows a couple of them, and it's very interesting. You often see like these crazy quilts and campaign quilts, and they'll have, your standard presidential and local politician campaigns and that kind of thing, but Oscar Wilde was just kind of an oddball one that people liked him for some reason, and he ended up in quilts. However, since crazy quilts took much time and material to make, the technique was often used on smaller items such as sofa pillows, chair tidies, table covers, and decorative scarves. These sold well at the women's exchanges. With crazy work recognized at the highest levels in needlework circles, crazy work became a mania for home decoration by 1883. 1883, pinnacle. Dorcas magazine wrote that of all the crazes which have swept over and fairly engulfed some of us, there is none which has taken a deeper hold upon the fair women of our land than this one of crazy patchwork. Many a woman with strong artistic taste finds no other outlet for it than in such work as this. That seems a little snarky. The Art Amateur reported that one of the ambitions of a young man of fashion nowadays is the possession of a crazy quilt made up of patches contributed by the ladies of his acquaintance. And his social progress may be reckoned by these patches as an Indian warrior's prowess is reckoned by his scalps. Well, that's horrible, but okay. The crazy quilt enthusiasm was fanned by entrepreneurs providing materials, designs, and directions in a seemingly mad rush to capitalize and extract a profit from this decorative craze. Just as we do today with fads. In the April 1884 issue of the Ladies' Home Journal, 7 different companies ran ads for patchwork silks on one page. Penny McMorris's beautiful book, Crazy Quilts, which Jill and I read last year on Quilt Nerding. And I think some of you that are here read it with us. So I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you're interested in it, I think, it's out of print, but I think it's pretty easy to find, like on Abe Books and all of the other used books sites. It's pretty easy to find. And it is a very good book. It's got great pictures in it. So her beautiful book, Crazy Quilts, clearly documents the crazy quilt at its peak of its popularity in the mid-1880s. One can see the amazing and rich variety of individual interpretations in this technique. As crazy work became popular and widespread, it lost much of its appeal among the taste setters, as things do. Editors of Dorcas, discussing Crazy Quilt in 1884, noted that many a country girl finds her only relief from an uncongenial life and unpleasant duties in the fancy work which the high art people delight to condemn. Very true. The same year, an editor of Harper's Bazaar began to write that the craze for decorative art has wrought a certain definite mischiefs with much good. The makers of Kensington stitch tablecloth borders, Holbein towel ends, decorative wastebaskets, and crazy patchwork seem to have eaten of the insane root that takes reason prisoner. Their countless stitches and ugly ingenuity appear to them the fit expression of aesthetic instincts. In spite of these opinions, crazy quilts flourished. By 1887, Godey's Ladies' Book found that the time, patience, stitches, and mistakes the crazy quilt represents are too awful for words. Yeah, so Godey's was all okay with it early on, but yeah, by 87, not so much. And as you guys know, my research, my big research topic, Dr. William Rush Dunton, hated crazy quilts. He called them those awful silk things. But by the time he kind of was sort of getting into his older years and wrapping up his research, he didn't love crazy quilts, but he loved one crazy quilt that he purchased for himself. So sometimes people come around. Reporting on the second competitive exhibition of needlework sponsored by the Canfield Company and held in New York City in December 1887, Godey's stated that we regretted much the time and energy spent on the most childish and unsatisfactory of all work done with the needle, crazy patchwork, and we strongly recommend that prizes for such work be omitted from all future announcements. Interviewed in 1887, Mrs. Candace Wheeler, now running the Associated Artists, her own design firm, opined that there is far too much embroidery, too much so-called ornamentation in our houses. She wished that she could turn all the miserable waste of embroidery into legitimate channels and decried the wretched fashion journals that have flooded the country with discordant designs made by cheap designers regardless of or in ignorance of the laws of color and composition. I love it. Crazy quilts continued to be made in abundance well into the 20th century, although they eventually ceased to be featured in leading periodicals. Later versions were often less ornate and detailed in design. And what I would say is, into the 20th century, right, Kenny? So, writers in the late 19th century were very judgmental and such hypocrites, too. Like these same magazines were like championing this stuff, and then a couple years later, it's like, boo, down with crazy quilts. But I would say the crazy quilts on into the 20th century were more like farmhouse crazies, and some of these are very beautiful, made with cotton fabrics, either very simple embroidery or no embroidery at all. So, they might have like the outlines of the blocks done, but so yeah, I think some of those and those may have been made like truly like, with like the scrappy scraps. So, and actually I think Julie Silber, who, if you don't follow her on Instagram and Facebook, you should. She is very well known. We've talked about her before. Quilt dealer in Berkeley, California. She recently posted, I think really just this week, she posted a video, a reel on social media, opening 2 quilts she had just gotten in her gallery. And they were both crazy quilts. One was kind of a different color scheme. It was like more of this drab color scheme. And then the other one was like bright pink and blue and yellow. Like, I say bright, but like they're really pastels. So 2 different eras. And like very interesting, but they were cotton. They were not these like silk and velvet things. It was noted that modern women were in a hurry and had neither the time, skill, nor patience for the finer and more elaborate kinds of art embroidery. Outline quilts remained popular for children. The design motifs changed to reflect trends in storybooks. Peter Rabbit and the Sunbonnet Babies replaced the Kate Greenaways and the Brownies of the 19th century. The Brownies were these little, like little sprites. They were very cute. In the 1890s, interest in traditional calico patchwork, long out of favor, began to reemerge. The era of the crazy quilt and Kensington outline work gradually became part of history, and interest in the decorative art needlework, and household art movements subsided. Many of the decorative art journals ceased publication. Most decorative art societies gradually faded from the scene in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as people became convinced, once again, that art should be in the hands of trained experts instead of amateurs. Oh. The women's exchanges lasted through the Depression, and some still exist today. For the most part, however, the art world turned its back on needlework, which was once again seen mainly as a pastime for women in the home. Modern scientific efficiency became the trend of the early 20th century. This movement favored a clean, uncluttered home where the decorative crazy quilt would look out of place. Many of them were packed away and saved, for they were scrapbooks of memories, reminders of an age when women followed the household art aesthetic trends by making artistic quilts to decorate their homes. Margaret E. Sangster captures the mood and meaning of this unique time in her poem, The Crazy Quilt, published in 1884. So she has this poem in here. The Crazy Quilt by Margaret E. Sangster. Patchwork only, did you say, this mosaic quaint and gay, starred with dainty applique, in confusion mazy, in confusion mazy. Sooth it hath a highborn air, with an easeful charm and rare, lightening the weight of care. Wherefore call it crazy? Every woman in the land this bewitching quilt has planned, slender fingers, toil-worn hand, pulse alike with pleasure. As the curious pieces blend, this an heirloom's grace to lend, that the souvenir of a friend, each a treasure, a cherished treasure. Patiently dear grandma sets, bit to bit and swift forgets, all the little daily frets, age and loss are bringing. And we hear her softly croon, to herself a tender tune, 'tis of youth and love a rune, she is gently singing. Shaking heads and looking wise, merchants smile with doubtful eyes, when the expectant of a prize, maidens beg a sample. Stock of velvet, silk, or frieze, like the famous nibbled cheese, disappears if dames to please, clipped are fragments ample. Patchwork 'tis but glorified, aureoled with stately pride, fit to offer to a bride as a wedding present. Stitched with more than common pains, offspring of artistic brains, wrought in flowers and loops and change, is this patchwork pleasant? And that is Dr. Virginia Gunn's article, or paper, her paper, on outlining crazy quilts. And let me give the title again. And this was the short one, you guys. This one took me quite a while to read. So again, this was in the 1984 issue of Uncoverings, the Journal of the American Quilt Study Group. And that paper was called Crazy Quilts and Outline Quilts, Popular Responses to the Decorative Art and Art Needlework Movement, 1876 to 1893, by Dr. Virginia Gunn. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I did. Like I said, selfish me knows that I will struggle to get any reading done, therefore I'm going to read it to you. So Kenny's got a good question. So one thing I've never known, is the embroidery the actual quilting, or is the quilting done in addition to the embroidery? The pieces I have, the embroidery in some cases sort of functions as quilting. And I am assuming you mean like the decorative embroidery, like just the stitches around the outside edges. So yes, some of them I have seen that, they're started with a foundation square, like she said, a square of fabric. Often it's discard fabric. I know the foundation piece quilts I have that are antique are it's fabric that was like clearly like an old sheet or an old tablecloth, because they're stained and they're kind of ratty, faded, but they're not seen, so the patches are built on top, so they're most of the time they're basted down, and then the embroidery stitches do go all the way through. That usually, I will say that usually they go all the way through to that that foundation piece. Now, crazy quilts that are backed, typically are just backed with like a, solid piece of fabric, and they may be tacked, or tied, at the like junctures or whatever. Um, so it's sort of like, to answer the question, it's kind of both. Crazy quilts are very, very, very rarely quilted, just because they've got so much going on, and they're, with all that silk and velvet, are often quite heavy or somewhat heavy. They've got stuff on them that's like painted velvet. I mean, this one I'm looking at now, it's got painted velvet and all kinds of stuff. So it wouldn't make any sense to quilt that. So I would say yes, it is kind of the quilting, but it would not go, if the quilt is backed, it would not go all the way through to that backing. It would be going through to that foundation piece. And people will often say, well, crazy quilts aren't really quilts because they don't have batting, and I posit that the foundation layer can act as the batting layer, for the 3 layers that define a quilt. And that, if it's backed, then it does function as like a true quilt. So yeah, and I've seen all kinds of stuff. I mean, I have one, I guess it's a crazy throw, and it's very badly done. But the reason I bought it is because it had some really interesting fabrics in it. In that case, like it's just a nightmare of stuff. It's stitched and it's embroidered, and some of the embroidery stitches are wild, and I think that quilt was kind of multi-layered, and then I don't know. The really good ones, I could tell you they kind of look like what I'm describing. So kind of, yeah, almost like quilt as you go, kind of, yeah. So is the foundation one large piece, or it's block by block and then joined? Can be both. So all of the ones I have, with the exception of one, I'm trying to think through. I have one that is just like a big gigantic craziness. Like, it is not blocks that are put together. It is just like they started in the middle or something, and they just branched out with all kinds of stuff. So that is done on, and I've only kind of looked at kind of the little opportunity holes that are in it from the shattered silk. That seems to be done on kind of some foundation pieces that were sort of cobbled together, as best as I can tell. It looks like they kind of took some big old pieces, laid them out, kind of loosely stitched them maybe, and then started building on top of them. All the rest of the crazy quilts I have, with the exception of the other one that's a big hot mess, are neat squares, and all of like the embroidery work is done within them, and then when they're joined, there is more embroidery work done. So particularly the one I'm working on now, and it also has some kind of neat things, because it'll have like kind of just that regular little embroidery stitch, like the kind of like a feather stitch or a fly stitch all the way around the edge. And then it'll have, you can tell I haven't made one of these. I mean, that's the thing, Kenny. It's like, you specialize in modern quilts and patchwork. And if you're not studying these things and you don't own one, I mean, it is kind of, I, for a long time, didn't quite understand how they were made until like I actually got one in my hands and was able to sort of not dissect it necessarily, but study all the aspects of it. And, yeah, they are very interesting. And, I think, again, like a really skilled needleworkers put them together, they basted, they turned the edges under, they tacked things down all the way through the foundation. They, and they're well constructed. And then, like I said, there's these other ones that are just like, let me stitch some shit together because this is really popular right now and I want one on my couch. It's pretty obvious, right? That some of them are done that way. The one that I'm working on right now, studying and documenting, it was given to me as a project to study and document it. And I've done some of the genealogy on it. The original owner, it came down through her family. And so she's kind of told me a little bit about the family. I did my research first, and then she told me some things that, to confirm what I had found. The woman whose name is on it and who it belonged to, her name was Emma Myers, and I don't know whether she made the quilt or not. There's evidence to me that there are multiple hands were made in the quilt, made these things, because there's some examples of like really fine needlework, like if you've ever seen like jacquard print, silks, like imagine like one of those, or damask, you look at the stitch, like not stitches, but the weave. And you could see that like designs are made by the weave being raised, there are some embroideries literally in this quilt that I thought were like that type of technology. Like they were woven that way. But on closer inspection, I realized that the fabric is marked, and a thread that was like a perfect match to the fabric was used to embroider these little different little motifs. And the one I'm thinking of right now, because I was looking at it yesterday, they're little pagodas. And again, I thought that they were like, this was a fabric printed, or not printed, but woven with these little pagodas. And when I looked at it closely, I was like, oh no, this stuff is actually marked. I can still see the markings, and it is a very fine stitch. Probably a silk thread, and like a very fine silk thread that was used to stitch these, and just, I mean, beautiful. And then there's other stuff, and I'm not going to say like it's bad work, but it is not that level. It's more of like my skill, like, a stem stitch and some other stitching. So I suspected it is made by, multiple people. And the woman, Emma Myers, was a hat maker. She worked in the millinery business. She eventually owned her own millinery like store, I guess, kind of. She had a shop. But throughout her life, she operated kind of, I guess, as an independent milliner. Like she listed her home address and in a directory, but she's listed as a milliner. So anyway, the point I'm trying to get to here is the quilt I'm studying right now, the Crazy Quilt, is it's very pretty, and it's in good condition because I think higher quality silks were used. You'll often find Crazy Quilts are shattered. The silks just fall apart for a variety of reasons. One is that silks were weighted, like the dyes and the mordants. There were heavy metals introduced to make the silk heavier, and therefore it could, they could charge more for it because, it's this heavier, nicer silk. Well, those, these chemicals that were put in, eventually I guess the molecules, not the molecules, the little bits of these heavy metals that are in these solutions eventually just causes the silk to rot, or it like literally mechanically cuts the little threads. And so you'll see, just silk shredded and shattered. Light and poor storage conditions can also, light and heat can affect silk. So you'll often, Crazy Quilts that you see in antique stores are often not in good condition. The really, really, really impeccable ones, they're in museums and private collections. So I was really, really thrilled to get my hands on the one I'm studying, because it is, there's a couple places where the silk is not in great condition, but for the most part, it is in very good condition. And I suspect the reason why is because all of the materials were sourced from a millinery shop, or, her own materials that she's working with, to make hats and bonnets. And, they were just nicer materials, plain and simple. She wasn't like saying, I'm going to jump on this fad and go make this quilt and let me get my hands on just a bunch of random silk. She's using silk ribbons and probably pieces of silk that might have lined a hat. And that's what she's using, or somebody was using to make this quilt. So, I see this as the one I have is it was made by really either competent to high level needle women. And it was cared for very well. And it is dated. It has the date 1883 on it. So it was obviously part of the fad. And her name is right in the middle of it in these like big Gothic letters. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but you know, I just, across the ones that I have and, you know, I've seen over the years, you have like really a very wide range of skill. And I think, you know, I think the one I have, I'm not going to say it's like some amazing artistic enterprise, because, you know, it's got embroidery things that are, you know, kind of work a day. It's got the Kate Greenway kids. It's got a couple of bizarre things in it, like there's a bird like either singing or giving an address. It's like a stork. And I think those again are those images like from storybooks and just other Victorian absurdity, you know, from that era. But it is, I think at the time it was made, it was probably very pretty. It's got fans in the corners. It's got, you know, lots of imagery in it. And again, these like very nice, sumptuous fabrics. So, you know, I think there's, it's very easy to disparage crazy quilts, because there were lots of crappy ones made. But I also think that there is something to say, just simply the absolute skill in the needlework in some of them, and the fact that they were decorative. It was a pretty thing to have in your home if it was well made. And even if it wasn't well made, it could be pretty from a distance. Now, the ones that you will see in museums and the Maryland Historical Society, the Maryland Center for History and Culture is their museum. It's been 2 years now, I think, almost 2 years, but they had an exhibit with several crazy quilts. And those crazy quilts are like the big, like, and of course I couldn't touch them or inspect them because it's in a museum. But I suspect those are like these big, like, foundations that, you know, they started and just went everywhere. And some of those are like absolutely like knock me over with a feather. They're just so amazing. And then, you know, like, again, there were the people that they made their quilts as in blocks. So, yeah. It's a Monet, pretty from a distance, but a big mess up close. Yes, indeed. Well, you guys, it is almost 4 o'clock my time. In 10 minutes. I am going to not read from the Patchwork Girl of Oz today. But if you, and I know Kenny, you haven't been here in a while, but we have been reading the Patchwork Girl of Oz. We started the other day and we got to chapter 5. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, the Patchwork Girl was not given brains by her creator, but was given brains by a particular munchkin child who, you know, and the powder of life has just been sprinkled on her. And so when we begin chapter 5, I think we're going to find out that the lots of extra brains she was given are not going to work out well for the person that created her. And that she's going to go on an adventure because she is super smart. So... spoiler alert, I think this is what is to come. So, yeah, so have a fantastic weekend, you guys. I hope wherever you are, it is warm and not snowing. And if it is weathering, which we're supposed to get snow tomorrow, stay warm, stay inside, snuggle up with your pets, and sew. Or read a book. I think these are the things we need to be doing right now as we are in the holiday season, which is stressful. So any time out that you can take to relax and read a book, do some sewing, whatever it is that brings you peace and happiness, do it this weekend, even if it's just for 15 minutes or if it's for 2 whole days. I highly recommend that, but you know, we all have responsibilities. So, all right, guys, it has been wonderful. I am so glad that you guys are here, that I can read this stuff to. And I hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Virginia Gunn's writing. I certainly have enjoyed reading it, and I've got 2 more of her papers queued up to read, hopefully tonight or tomorrow. So, all right, guys, take care. I will see you on Monday. Bye.